investigate any individual who commits a crime, especially those in positions of public trust.
But do you agree with the presumption of innocence in the U.S.?
Okay, where do we even begin? Because you guys are not going to believe this one. I'm sure you are aware this is the judge from Wisconsin who was arrested by the FBI for obstruction, for sneaking an illegal immigrant out the back door of her courtroom. Well, as you know, Democrats, they were upset about her being arrested. Well, now they're not. Now they are upset because this picture was taken and it was posted on the internet. I'm not making this stuff up.
Let me ask you a question about Judge Dugan. And I'm not going to get into about Judge Dugan, who was arrested, taken out in handcuffs from her courtroom. You agree that as director of the FBI, you should lead by example, right?
Try to.
Okay. Well, there's a confidentiality and media contacts policy within the Department of Justice guidelines that says specifically that DOJ personnel should not voluntarily disclose a photograph of a defendant unless it serves a law enforcement function or unless the photograph is already part of the public record in the case. Clearly, Judge Dugan's photograph was not already part of the public record in the case.
Now, I know what you're all thinking. Isn't that the senator who went down to El Salvador to go and save Kilmar Obrego Garcia? Yes, that is him. In fact, we will get to that later in the video. But first, I want to point out a lot of Democrats were super upset about this photo. And finally, a Democrat gets to confront Kash Patel about this. Check out this answer.
So it appears that what you did was a violation of that policy, unless you can express a clear law enforcement purpose for having done that.
The simple law enforcement purpose is to show America that we investigate any individual who commits a crime, especially those in positions of public trust.
But do you agree with the presumption of innocence in the U.S. system?
Absolutely. As a public defender, that's what I fought for years. Well, but that's different than this.
But Mr. Director, this is one of the reasons why that guideline is there, so people, especially the director of the FBI, doesn't announce to the country that somebody's already been found criminally liable when they haven't. She hasn't, has she?
But that's not what we said, that she was criminally liable. We said she was arrested and showed it.
We know she was arrested, but the issue is the photograph. I'm asking you, going forward, I hope as the leader of the FBI, you will comply with the guidelines of the FBI that everybody else is expected to follow.
I believe I have, and I will going forward.
Well, this seems like a direct violation.
Now, of course, we had to fact check this. All Kash Patel said is, no one is above the law when it came to the photo. But when it came to announcing to the world we arrested a judge, all he said was, we believe Judge Dugan intentionally misdirected federal agents. Not that we know, but we believe. Pretty much letting everyone know, because we believe this, we arrested her, thus she has to go through a due process, which Democrats love due process, don't they?
Despite what you just said, the federal district court whose judge is hearing this case right now said, and I'm quoting, that the administration has provided no evidence linking Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or any other terrorist activity. I'm not vouching for the man. I'm vouching for his due process rights.
Yes, you are, sir. You've been vouching for
Madam
him.
Secretary, with
respect. I would suggest that you defend and stand alongside the victims of illegal crime.
This is political rhetoric.
Citizens who live here and are United States Americans. I would suggest you advocate for them as hard
Madam
as you do
Secretary,
terrorists.
I know you're doing a political speech here.
I'm
I
not,
get it.
sir.
I'm asking questions of law. No, you're just spewing
I truly
rhetoric.
believe this. I
Well, you're
truly believe
spewing
this
rhetoric.
as an
Let
American.
me ask you this. Despite
You can't make this stuff up. Just a few weeks ago, this is the same senator who went all the way down to El Salvador and told all of their local media, this is a great man, he should be freed, he did nothing wrong. Now, just a few weeks later, he is standing in front of the world and telling everybody, hold on, I'm not vouching for the man, I'm vouching for the situation, I'm vouching for the due process, but not Kilmar Obrego Garcia. Make it make sense.
We're getting some breaking news at this hour coming out of the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court has handed President Trump a victory, letting him and his administration use the 1798 law that historically has been employed only in wartime to swiftly deport alleged Venezuelan gang members as part of the Republican president's hardline approach to immigration, granting that administration request to lift the Washington-based U.S. judge James Boasberg's March 15th order that had temporarily blocked the summary deportations.
So I think it's safe to say the Kilmar Obrego Garcia story is officially over, considering even the Supreme Court said, that's it, we're done, we are in favor of the Alien Enemies Act, and Donald Trump can invoke it if he wants. Now, speaking of Democrats freaking out, I think you're really going to enjoy this clip of Bernie Sanders.
Last thing, Alyssa Slotkin, senator from Michigan, she said you shouldn't be using oligarch. It's over people's head. You've gotten criticized from other people. Free Beacon says Bernie Sanders spent $221,000 on private jets fighting the Oligarchy tour, paid for by friends of Bernie Sanders. That you've spent millions of dollars in campaign funds on private jet travel over the years. How do you push back on both of those things?
When's the last time you saw Donald Trump during a campaign mode at National Airport?
No, it doesn't. But he's also not fighting the oligarchy.
No. You run a campaign and you do 3 or 4 or 5 rallies in a week. The only way you can get around to talk to 30,000 people. Think I'm going to be sitting on a waiting line at United, waiting, 30,000 people are waiting? That's the only way you can get around. No apologies for that. That's what campaign travel is about. We've done it in the past. We're going to do it in the future.
Now, I do want to point out, Republicans and conservatives don't care if you're flying a private jet. However, the premise of the tour is to fight the oligarchy, especially against Elon Musk, who also flies private jets, and I'm going to fly a private jet too because I don't like Elon Musk or rich people. You see how it makes no sense and why people are questioning the Bernie Sanders AOC oligarchy tour? However, his response reminds me of this.
Almost all the members of this panel are accepting, including yourself, are accepting millions of dollars from the pharmaceutical industry.
No,
protecting their interests.
Oh, I thought that would come. No. I ran for president like you. I got millions and millions of contributions. They did not come from the executives, not one nickel of PAC money from the pharmaceutical industry. They came from workers.
In 2020, you were the single largest
because I had
receiver of pharmaceutical money
from workers all over this country. Workers,
you were the
not a nickel from corporate
PACs. You were the single largest acceptor of pharmaceutical dollars.
No, from workers in
1.5 million.
Yeah, out of 200 million. All right, but you have not answered. Last question.
Look, Bernie Sanders has been in politics for a very long time. You almost have to admire how good Bernie Sanders is at completely deflecting a question. Now, speaking of somebody who's been in politics for a very long time, look who's back.
Should you have withdrawn earlier, given someone else a bigger chance?
I don't think it would have mattered. Things moved so quickly that it made it difficult to walk away. It was a hard decision.
Okay, so basically Joe Biden is back. Again, this is not uncommon for presidents to just disappear and then all of a sudden they reappear. Remember, they get paid to do stuff like this, or maybe they'll sell a book. And speaking of books, let us remember a lot of books are being written about Joe Biden.
I have talked to a lot of Democrats. I have this book coming out in a week and 6 days, who think not only should he have gotten out immediately after the debate, so June 28th, but he should never run for re-election to begin with. Okay. What do you think?
I think it was the president's decision to make, Joe Biden, and he made his decision.
Yeah.
I think we're at a critical inflection point within the Democratic Party. We can either continue to look backwards and allow this issue to paralyze us as a party, or we can move forward. and decide we need to take full advantage of this opportunity, unprecedented opportunity that Donald Trump has presented the party.
Now, you are probably wondering, why are Democrats so afraid just to say Joe Biden should have dropped out? I never liked Joe Biden, things like that. Remember, Barack Obama, he's got Joe Biden's back. If you ever want to win any election as a Democrat, if Barack Obama backs you, you're most likely going to win. So, if you're going to hate on Barack Obama's best friend here and former vice president, you're going to have to speak to the Obamas, which is why you're not seeing a lot of Democrats be too harsh on President Biden. If anything, they're being harsh on the left-leaning media, not specifically Biden himself.
Brian, I think you and I agree that the Democratic Party needs to have some sort of reckoning about the Biden presidency, especially the last year and a half of it.
The answer is they need to do it for themselves, because if they don't, we're going to define it. At the end of the day, we're going to highlight the fact that this fraud took place, that, Joe Biden, it's funny, he says in the comment that the world moves too fast. Well, when you're moving at Joe Biden's pace, a snail is fast, right? And when he says, the walking fast, he's not walking fast. I mean, people have, if they don't cure this issue for themselves, and it is a trust issue. Trump gets away with a lot. I don't think the Democrats get away with that much. But if they don't cure this issue, we're going to bring it up, and we're going to continue to highlight, we're going to continue to highlight that with real national security concerns, with real effects that affect real people, some guy who's supposed to be in the Oval Office doing the job was incapable of it, and staff propped it up. That's a problem. We should be investigating.
Okay, Ashley, last.
Now, before we get to Joe Biden on The View, and I promise you're going to want to see that, Scott Jennings has this to say about the books and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
These books, first of all, seeing that video of Kamala Harris and then these videos of Tim Walz the last few days, man, did we dodge a bullet. Lord have mercy. These books coming out.
Walking into the fire right now,
These
Scott.
books coming out. It can all be told now. I mean, I sat here all during the campaign and was assured Joe Biden was fine. Kamala Harris had the most organic, grassroots-driven campaign. The Democrats were unified. We had a campaign of joy, and everything was hunky-dory. That's what I was told night after night after night. Mm-hmm. And now all the books are coming out, and it's amazing because a lot of the people who were telling those lies are now going to get paid to write those books.
I think a lot of people,
it's crazy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel.
I mean, it really is remarkable when you think about it. There are people today in the media where every single night they were saying, look how bad Donald Trump looks, look how great Joe Biden looks, and now all of a sudden, books are coming out where the same people who are involved saying Joe Biden looks great, now they're saying Joe Biden looked bad the whole time.
Mr. President, since you left office, there have been a number of books that have come out, deeply sourced from Democratic sources, that claim in your final year there was a dramatic decline in your cognitive abilities. In the final year of your presidency, what is your response to these allegations, or are these sources wrong?
They are wrong. There's nothing to sustain that. Number one. Number two, think of what we're left with. We're left with a circumstance where we had an insurrection when I started.
Now, I want to give you guys a little more context, because obviously Joe Biden is not going to hate on anybody and just says, I'm good to go. However, this is what was actually happening behind the scenes. A lot of people forget this clip exists on the internet right now.
Personally, I think what was the toughest thing to see in the 3 weeks was there was a disconnect for me, what was happening with leadership in the Democratic Party and how it was truly, as my former colleague, communications director Ben LeBolt said, it was a firing squad. And I had never seen anything like it before. I'd never seen a party do that in the way that they did. And it was hurtful and sad to see that happening. A firing squad around a person who I believe was a true patriot, a person who I believe did everything that he can for this country, a person who I believe, as I mentioned before, has done more in one term than most presidents had done in 2 terms, historical things. And I was shocked by what I was seeing.
And Karine, just to clarify, these are other Democrats and Democratic leadership coming out against Biden.
Yep, I had never seen anything like that. That was, if you're asking me, the thing that I saw in those 3 weeks, that was shocking.
Now look, to be fair, I completely understand that Democrat leadership was freaking out after the horrible performance of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump when it came to that initial debate. I mean, it was a done deal after that. The American public, everybody was shocked. What is going on with Joe Biden? However, what's more shocking are the things that were happening behind the scenes. Now, Joe Biden is not completely left off the hook. In these books, it talks about Joe Biden taking a nap instead of preparing for the debate, jumping in the pool, things like that. But I do want to point out a lot more was happening behind the scenes as far as a lot of people turning on Joe Biden.
The people who wrote those books were not in the White House with us, and they didn't see how hard Joe worked every single day. I mean, he'd get up, he'd put in a full day, and then at night I'd be in bed, reading my book, and he was still on the phone, reading his briefings, working with staff. I mean, it was nonstop.
Now, I do have to point this out because now we have conflicting information as far as, did Joe Biden have a cognitive decline, or are the people who are writing these books, are they making up the stories? What exactly is going on?
At one point during a session in Aspen Lodge, the presidential cabin, Biden wanders out in the middle of the session. He wanders out to the pool, collapses into a lounge chair, and falls sound asleep. So now, fast forward. Nevertheless, they go ahead with this debate. I asked Clay, and I said, "Why? Why in the world would you do that?" And he said, "Well, it was politically just wasn't feasible to cancel it at that point, so they couldn't do it." But it's
because he had a cold. That's what the line was. The president had a cold, and if a cold could knock you out of the most important night of your life, how really strong are you?
Yeah, exactly, and also just the issue of age and mental infirmity at that point was it was the issue in the campaign.
Now, to be fair to Joe Biden, the author who wrote that in the book, he is sort of redacting it a little bit and saying, look, that was over embellished. That was never meant to make Joe Biden look too bad. I just want to point that out. But nonetheless, it was still written in a book.
The White House Correspondents Association is as necessary as ever. President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story, and some people trust us less because of it. We bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows. I say this because acknowledging errors builds trust, and being defensive about them further erodes it.
All right, if you are still watching this video, I really do appreciate it. We are in such bizarre times. On one hand, a senator went all the way down to another country just to not defend the same guy 2 weeks later. Whatever, we can all change our minds, but also to defend and then not defend a judge at the same time, also bizarre. I'm actually kind of happy to see President Biden back. Maybe he will be on that arc like George Bush was. A lot of people hated George Bush. He disappeared, came back, and a lot of people actually ended up liking him in the end. And maybe we'll see that with Joe Biden. Thank you guys so much for being here. God bless, and we'll see you all later.